Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for our Fall 2017 Governance Update. My name is Alexis McKittrick, and I'm the FY18 Secretary for the Society of Women Engineers. And joining me is Penny Wirsing, our FY18 President-elect. Penny and I were both members of the FY17 Governance Task Force, and Penny chaired that committee. And we're excited tonight to provide you with some governance updates. Before we get started, I just wanted to go through a couple of logistics. Tonight's presentation will take roughly an hour, perhaps a little bit less. We do have more time than that on the calendar, and that's to ensure that everybody has an opportunity to enter their questions in the chat and hopefully get those answered. So if you're interested in staying on for the presentation, that will take about an hour, and if you're interested in staying in for the full Q&A session, we can definitely stay on after that. Additionally, I know that everybody is muted this evening, and as I just mentioned, if you do have questions, please do go ahead and type them into the chat box. So if you scroll over to your webinar sidebar, there's an area that says chat. Type them in there, and we'll be excited to get to them at the end of the presentation after we've gone through all of the slides. So again, I'd just like to thank everyone for attending tonight. We really appreciate everyone's interest in SWE's governance changes and wanting to hear updates on what's going on. What we're going to cover tonight is we are going to go through a little bit of background on the SWE governance efforts. Of course, as we always say, there's a full list of background materials and information available at governance.swe.org for your perusal after the call tonight. We're also going to talk a little bit about the process to date that we've gone through. We will provide a summary, kind of high-level points on the final implementation plan for the governance changes. And we'll also address kind of some common governance myths and questions that we've heard from members as we've gone through this process. We'll also give everyone a sneak peek into kind of next steps, particularly for WE17, but also for the rest of FY18 and beyond. And then, time willing, we'll take some questions from the audience via that chat function we talked about earlier. Also, we will record the webinar this evening for members that can't attend tonight, and we'll be posting it to governance.swe.org within the next couple of days. So if you know of other members that couldn't attend tonight, please do let them know that so they have the opportunity to view the webinar. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Penny Wirsing.
Great. Thank you, Alexis. I appreciate it. And good evening, everyone. So I'm going to start out by just setting the stage a little bit. Many of you are probably aware of this, but you know, the really good news is that SWE has been incredibly successful in recent years. We're now almost 40,000 members, and we've grown our programs and our influence around the globe, and this is great. It's what we've all been working toward, and we should all be incredibly proud of this. With this success comes the realization that we need to keep our structure and our leadership opportunities relevant. We're all aware that today's ability to network and access information is very different than it was even a few years ago. And we recognize that many professional organizations are struggling to keep their members engaged. I think also many of us have seen the challenges personally with filling leadership positions, perhaps with some of our members holding multiple roles or holding a position for multiple years, which can lead to burnout. So things are changing, and we need to change as well. So we have a fabulous opportunity to make some changes that are going to take SWE to the next level. You could go to the next page. So how this all started, actually back in late 2014, the board of directors started looking at how to make some improvements, recognizing that changes were going to be needed. And the board quickly realized that we're not experts in organizational change. So we sought out services of McKinley Consultants, and McKinley is an organization that deals with nonprofits and asks for their help in determining an ideal governance structure and volunteer service model. So McKinley reviewed a lot of data. They conducted a number of interviews with active SWE members. Those SWE members included representatives from across the U.S. and around the world, and included women who had served in a number of different leadership positions in SWE at the section, region, committee, board of directors, and board of trustees levels. Those interviewees also included a number of fellows, and I believe the average tenure of the interviewees was around 20 years. So they really tried to get a good understanding of SWE's needs, and they came up with a number of recommendations. Now, those recommendations we took, and in 2016, we worked with a number of SWE leaders, current SWE leaders, senators, region governors, board members, and developed some subgroups to look at key areas and take McKinley's recommendations and really fit those to our needs. All of this information all this collaborative discussion with all of these different people helped us piece together a high-level vision, and that was shared with a number of SWE leaders in January 2016, and based on that, the FY17 Governance Task Force was developed and worked over the last many months and to flesh out the details that we'll be talking about tonight. As Alexis mentioned, there's a lot more background on the governance.swe.org website. So if you haven't already checked that out, please do so. So here's a little more visual timeline of what has happened to date. We've already talked about the first several boxes there. So that in July 2016, the Governance Task Force was formed, and at We16 last year, there was a lot of discussion. The task force held office hours, a lot of socialization, just to answer questions and help people understand the direction that we're heading. In January 17, we met with the Senate, and they voted to endorse the plan, the high-level plan that the task force had developed. And so over the next several months, we did additional socialization, and we've had podcast webinars. Many of those are offered on the links are on the website. In June 2017, we shared the draft implementation plan, and hopefully you've all had a chance to take a look at that. And we incorporated comments that were received and revised that plan in July of this year, 2017, so that in August we held a governance summit, and that was held with about 100 SWE leaders to provide a venue for further collaboration among the attendees and to try to resolve any remaining issues and just ensure clarity moving forward. In September, earlier this month, we have finalized and communicated the implementation plan and posted the bylaws amendments. And those amendments are to be voted on by the Senate next month at We17. So what's changing in the society? You know, all of this work has focused on key changes that will provide more meaningful leadership opportunities for our members and really set SWE up for success in the future. Specifically, we're restructuring to take the focus off geography. That made good sense when it was implemented, but really in today's virtual world, the specific geographic boundaries that were established years ago are not as important today. There's much more virtual interaction. We're also giving collegiate members voting rights, something that's been under discussion for some time now, and all nominations, whether for the board of directors, senators, committees, will be based on competencies rather than geography. The goal is to have all of these changes ready to implement by the end of this fiscal year, so by June. So that said, we are also focused on retaining those aspects that make SWE SWE. For example, the ability to connect on a local level, not necessarily with the rigid geographic boundaries, but certainly being able to connect locally. The camaraderie, the support that so many of us have experienced with SWE. In terms of how sections are impacted, for the average section, the change is really that region support is transitioning to the Leadership Coaching Committee, which is considering changing their name, but currently that's what they're called, and to headquarters. And we'll talk a lot more about that further in the presentation. And also the section representative, which is currently identified as a representative to the region, will no longer be required under the bylaws. So that's basically what's changing. What's not changing is local connections. Like I said, we recognize there's value there. So things like the We Locals will continue. There's actually a task force that has been put together this year looking at the future of leadership summits, because there's been a lot of discussion about value that those summits bring. But basically, the operations and the programming of individual sections is not changing. Everything that you do with your members, the outreach, the professional development, the networking, that doesn't change. Everything you do for your members, such as recognition and scholarship, that doesn't change. And even logistics, such as applying for program development grants and getting dues rebates, those don't change. So there really is a lot that's not changing. We'll look a little bit at the section support structure. And again, we'll talk about this a little bit more later on. But the section support will look more like this, with multiple sources depending on the specific need. So headquarters will be taking on some of the more administrative tasks. There's actually a group of region governors and LCC and others looking this year at which tasks are being done and which really add value, reporting specifically. So there's a chance that some of that will be going away. Obviously, we need to maintain our 501c3 requirements, but where the support comes from, it will look different than it does today, but it will still be there. And Alexis, again, will cover this a little bit more in a few slides. So the final implementation plan. The plan itself is about 50 pages long, so we're just going to hit some of the highlights here. Just to reiterate, the motion that was approved by the Senate in 2017 endorsed the plan that had been presented, and it had some very specific requirements in there, and that's what the task force used to build the implementation plan. So it was pretty basic. It said collegiates will be granted full voting rights. Terms for Senate will be 3 years, recognizing that this is a strategic body, and it's very difficult having half of that body turn over every year. So 3 years was providing some additional consistency. Also, the nominations and elections will be competency-based rather than geographic-based. The regions would dissolve by the end of this fiscal year. And again, just simply because the nominating committee had been identified in the bylaws as to how they were being selected, it was reiterated that they would now be selected without regard for geographic location. So that's very, very basic. There are also a lot of recommendations that don't require a motion from the Senate because they're not in our bylaws, but they are intended to provide those meaningful leadership experiences for our members. And I think if you look at the implementation plan, you'll see that most of that talks to improvements that can be made, that will be made in the coming months that are outside of bylaws. In terms of society elections, and some of these are things that the Senate will be approving, collegiates will now have the right to vote in elections. The collegiate director term is transitioning from 1 year to 2, consistent with all of the other board positions. And as well, the collegiate director will be elected by all the members, not just the collegiate section presidents. And again, that's consistent with the other board positions. Standing committees, which had been listed at 3 and is being increased to 5, are outlined in the bylaws, and that's to help give a sense of checks and balances. So those committees include now audit, finance, nominating, bylaws, and ethics. And for those standing committees, the chairs-elect will be slated by the nominating committee and elected by all of the members. And then the following year, they will transition into the chair position. In terms of leadership pipeline, there has been a lot of discussion about how people will get leadership opportunities if they if the region isn't there. And so actually, if you go to the next page, there's a bit of a graphic there that explains that there really are a lot of different ways of getting leadership opportunity. We've heard people explain that they have a hard time envisioning this, and so we developed a number of examples that outline some possible career paths, recognizing each one is different, but possible career paths along with the competencies that are needed and those that may be developed in each role. You know, similar to our careers at work, these pathways build on one another as we progress, and also similar to work, there's no one career ladder that everyone will follow. But there are several specific examples available on the governance website, governance.swe.org. In particular, it's in response to question number 3, if you go to the Q&As, and you'll see quite a number of examples that you can go through there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alexis.
Thanks, Penny. There's a lot of great info in just a couple of slides, and now I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on a couple of kind of common Q&As, or we've been calling them governance myths, that we've heard as we've been socializing some of this information. Some of this came from you know, some of the leaders at the Governance Summit that had questions. Some came from the feedback that we received on the implementation plan, where folks had some questions that they put in their comments. And some has come kind of directly from sections and members, particularly as part of the recent region leadership summits, for example. And so we've tried to compile a couple of these myths to help dispel them and at the same time answer some common questions that we're hearing about governance. And the first couple of these will focus on sections particularly. So the first myth that we've heard is that sections will lose their connection with society updates without their section representatives. So as Penny mentioned, the section representative position in the context of the region council that they're a part of will be going away, of course, with the dissolution of regions. But the truth is that there are lots of avenues, even now, for sections to receive updates and information from the society, and there will be even more going forward. And we've listed just a couple of them here. We want to make sure that folks are aware of them and taking advantage of them, as some of them are well established and some of them are relatively new. So of course, the We Local and We Conferences provide a lot of opportunities to get information, as well as face-to-face meetings and interactions on SWE business, including town halls. the SWE social media presence and also the All Together presence, including the very popular All Together blog, where there's been a lot of really great stories and information posted, including most recently the bylaws updates that will be voted on at WE17 as part of these governance changes. Of course, the website is always available, and there have been a number of updates to that, including some information on headquarters staff and positions so that folks can see who the faces behind all the good work at headquarters are, and that's available under the leadership portion of the SWE.org website. Also, online and in-person SWE groups and connections. So a really good example of this obviously is our affinity groups that have really taken off in the last year. Particularly the Facebook aspect of those affinity groups has really taken off, and we encourage you all, if you have not yet checked out those, that you do see what affinity groups are popping up and which ones you feel you can affiliate with to help with those online discussions and help you make those connections. Society emails, of course, to section presidents and to others as well. Just this is referencing sections, so we're talking about section presidents here. And then general membership emails. And this is also a good place to put in a plug that if you haven't checked out the new association management system and discovered that when you log into the SWE website that you, in your profile, you can actually change your communication preferences. So you can actually go through and check what types of emails you want to get from SWE and what types of emails you do not, or what types of communications in general. So that's a good way to tailor the communications to what types of information you personally want to receive from the society. And then, of course, we've started recently to allow text alerts for a number of different topics. And so governance is a really good example of that. We started the text alert process for whenever there was a significant update to the governance website or there was a significant governance milestone that was occurring. Then we texted it out to everyone who'd subscribed to the system, and it's a great way to stay appraised of, for the topic that you're most interested in, what's going on with that particular area. And again, a lot of these you will probably use now, and if you don't, please start. We encourage everybody to start using these. SWE's been working really hard to communicate and make a lot of options available for how you receive information. So again, we encourage you to participate in that. The next myth is that LCC coaches are the new region governors. And so again, for those not familiar, LCC stands for the Leadership Coaching Committee. So Penny went through this a little bit before, but I'm going to touch on it a bit more. So with regions dissolving, understandably, sections want to know who to go for the items that they used to talk to their region officers or region governors about. And the truth is that the governor's responsibilities will be divided among several different SWE groups, and Penny showed this graphic earlier. And so essentially the headquarters will be taking on a lot of the administrative responsibilities that used to be handled by regions, including leadership reports, financial reports, any interaction with the leadership portal and the AMS system, email reminders, and then general questions, whether they're about finances and tax reporting, or about general membership questions that go to membership at SWE.org, for example. And then the LCC is really going to be a kind of a consulting and coaching, and consulting and training resource for sections going forward. Each section will have an LCC coach that's assigned to them to have a contact that they can reach out to about questions about their section vitality or what types of training resources they need. LCC is currently implementing a new approach with SMEs, or subject matter experts, where they're going to have specific points of contact with SWE expertise in given topic areas that can be reached out to by any section. So that's going to be a great new additional resource for folks. And then, of course, we talked on the previous slide about the online tools and resources that are currently available, and we're going to try and continue to roll more of them out. There are several potential new ones mentioned in the implementation plan, so another plug to go dive into that. And then you'll see at the bottom of this graphic, in addition to all of these other resources, collegiate sections, of course, will continue to have their professional counselors and faculty advisors. Those roles are not on the whole changing, but they are structure, an additional support structure that does stay in place for the collegiate sections going forward. It's also important to note that we are developing what we've been calling a responsibilities matrix that we hope to make available to sections within the next couple of months. What this matrix will be is essentially kind of a laundry list, if you will, of all of the different items that, that regions have traditionally handled for sections or have done in consultation with sections, and then another column that would review who is going to be taking on that responsibility going forward. The idea behind that matrix is, of course, to make sure that for every single thing that sections have questions about, that there is kind of one reference document that you can go to that will have that information and to who you would go to going forward once regions have dissolved. So the next myth is LCC coaches will be responsible for bringing sections in the same area together for events. So you'll see this is kind of related to the previous one about LCCs being the new region governors. Again, that's obviously not correct, but LCC coaches will be focusing on consulting and training for sections and can help facilitate those relationships and make introductions. So I think an important point when this comes up is that sections affiliate locally now and hold joint events with neighboring sections, typically without region support. And this type of organic collaboration is something that we've always encouraged and we want to continue going forward. And the LCC coaches can absolutely facilitate that and help identify maybe synergies or common interests between sections that they are mentoring and working with. But ultimately those will be activities that the section would lead as opposed to the LCC coach being responsible for leading them. So it's a facilitation role as opposed to a leadership role. And that also creates good professional development opportunities within the section for leading those events and fostering those collaborations. The next myth is collegiate members will be able to influence the outcome of an election when given voting rights. Well, this is one of those myths that is definitely true when you look at it on face value. So collegiate members, just like any group that would be voting in an election, will be able to influence that election. And we certainly want any voting member to feel like they can have their voice heard within SWE through their vote. But one important piece of this myth and of this truth is that the nominating committee will, of course, still be responsible for vetting of all candidates that will be on the slate. So that process as a whole is not changing, and there will still be a nomination process and a vetting process to establish qualified candidates and make sure that those folks make it onto the slate. So that as a whole is not changing, and collegiate members will, of course, have an impact on elections, but it's, again, no different than any group of voting professional members who would participate in elections today. Also, a common question that comes up along with this is, the petition process. And of course, we still have and want to have the option for someone to add a candidate via the petition process, but that is a very robust procedure to ensure that a candidate has broad support if they're being added via that separate process that's kind of external to the nominating committee vetting. So again, those processes overall are not changing. We're just adding a new group of voting members, which we're really excited about, and we hope that all members, professionals, collegiates, everyone votes in election. Voter turnout has typically been relatively low for the society, 9 to 13% of members, and so we're hoping going forward that folks who are kind of engaged and interested in elections, that everybody participates. There it goes. The next myth, and I just have a couple more, is that there won't be any collegiate senators under the new governance structure. And we actually get this question a lot. This is one of the more common ones. So with the Senate transitioning to a competency-based system and to 3-year terms, there will not be a collegiate senator seat, just like there won't be an international senator seat. Each of the 7 senators that would be elected each year going forward are going to be elected based on the competencies and how well that they're fitting into the competency needs for the Senate for that year, which largely involves strategic planning experience, because that's the Senate is, of course, the strategic body of SWE. So these competency-based Senate positions will represent a diversity of SWE membership. We want to have diverse voices. We want folks to have strategic planning experience on the Senate. We don't want everyone on the Senate to be carbon copies of each other and all in the same stages of their career and all from the same industry, right? It's really important that the diversity of the Senate reflects the diversity of our SWE membership. So what happens if, say, if we're using collegiates as the example, no collegiate senators put in for the nominating process, or maybe a couple put in but they aren't found to be qualified? Well, there are special senator positions. We've actually increased that from 2 to 3 per year for one-year terms that can be used to fill any identified gaps in that diversity of membership or gaps in competencies. And we're using collegiates as the example, but there could be other gaps as well. It could be an identified gap that there is not a senator who, say, works for a small business, or an identified gap that there is not a senator that represents retired membership within SWE, for example. So you just have to look across that diversity of membership and make sure that we have kind of all of the appropriate voices represented at the table for those voices in the strategic planning efforts of the society. Of course, as a strategic body of SWE, is a great place for collegiate members to continue to hone their strategic vision and planning skills. An important point here is I've heard from several collegiates that, well, where am I supposed to get strategic planning experience? I'm not in the working world. Well, the working world isn't the only place to get strategic planning experience. You could get it from doing the strategic vision for another volunteer group that you work with on campus. You could get it through visioning work that you do as part of an internship, for example. So there's a lot of different opportunities that are out there, and I think it's a really good and important skill set to have. So not only will it help out SWE if you hone those skills, but it's also going to help you out as well in your career. So another myth we've heard, there will be no more leadership summits. Particularly with region leadership summits occurring over the last 2 months, a lot of folks have had this question. And the truth is the exact path forward on the region leadership summits is yet to be determined. And the reason for that is because one of the recommendations of the implementation plan was to set up an FY18 Leadership Summit Task Force to determine the exact form that leadership summits would take going forward. So the FY17 Region Governance Team, so that's last year's Region Governance Team, kind of put together some information on the different regions, how they do their leadership summits, how they're different, how they're the same, the types of things that folks really enjoy getting out of leadership summits. And so building on that work, the Leadership Summit Task Force is going to take that. They've been visiting a lot of the region leadership summits that they've been occurring the last couple of months, and they're going to really think about what makes sense going forward with regions, with region sunsetting at the end of this year. What do region leadership summits look like going forward? What type of training is most valuable to members? What are the logistics? Would it be 1 day, 2 day, virtual, in person? And what does that look like for us as a group going forward? So we're really looking forward to obviously hearing the recommendations from this task force and getting to implement them in FY19. So another common myth would be that without without region positions, there won't be enough leadership positions to go around. And we understand that when folks see that the region council positions and the section rep positions and the region officer positions are all kind of sunsetting with regions, that seems like a lot of positions that are going away. However, I think a lot of us know, and I know we have a lot of current leaders on the phone here now, that a lot of leaders fill multiple roles now, or they stay in the same role for several years. And unfortunately, that's kind of been part of our issue as we started to examine the current state of SWE leadership experiences and how to create more meaningful experiences for folks, is that we found a lot of folks are finding it difficult to find a willing replacement for their current position, which again leads to folks staying in this role for several years, which I think Penny mentioned earlier. And many tasks, they just don't feel like a good use and a valuable use of your volunteer time. And this is really where we've tried to take a lot of the admin responsibilities of some of the these positions and kind of move them to headquarters or move them to other areas where they're not necessarily the responsibility of these volunteer leaders who are putting in their extra time into SWE and want to make sure that they are being as impactful as possible while also developing themselves as leaders. And again, unfortunately, this leads to volunteer burnout often. We're really trying to create these more meaningful leadership opportunities to allow for that professional development. And there are new leadership opportunities being created within the LCC, and we talked about the subject matter expert roles, and there are several new leadership positions within LCC and coordination positions that have been created as part of the governance changes, and also within other committees as well. And I just want to mention that committees are do really important and impactful work for SWE across kind of a lot of different facets of the organization. And they really need active and engaged leaders. So I would just encourage folks on the phone, if you were thinking about a region position for next year and are kind of now wondering what you're going to do, I really encourage you to look at our committees. There's a lot of really valuable and impactful programs for SWE there, and a really great way to serve SWE's mission while also really getting to participate in something that's going to develop you personally while also helping SWE. Okay. So another myth is that regions currently own or manage the leadership pipeline for SWE. So again, with regions going away, who's going to manage the leadership pipeline? Well, the truth is that all SWE leaders own the leadership pipeline. There's been a lot of questions around, once regions go away, a lot of folks consider that a natural stepping stone from sections to region leadership and then to society leadership. But while regions were a piece, they're just one part. And we just talked a lot about committees and how those can contribute. And of course, there are a number of other places within SWE, especially some of these emerging areas, like being an affinity group lead online, for example, that are great examples of how you can participate in SWE in the way that's most meaningful to you and in the amount of time that you have, whether you have a couple hours a week, 1 hour a month, or more time to give to your position. Going forward, as we implement the governance changes, we're really going to need to update how we discuss and talk about and honestly even think about leadership positions. A lot of folks, I think, are hungry for more information about leadership positions, and we have several actions in the implementation plan that are focused on kind of new and different and better ways to get information about leadership positions out to SWE members. And those include things like, virtual SWE leadership career fairs, to kind of more in-person interaction and information about SWE leadership roles at We Local and the Society Conference, to things like, with our increased online presence, do we need kind of a, one of those kind of online quizzes that you can take it, and once you answer some questions, it'll help identify what committees or what parts of SWE leadership might be most interesting to you. So a lot of interesting ideas to consider, and again, we're open to hearing thoughts, more thoughts on different ways to do that as well. So again, we're looking for SWE leaders with the competent, we are hoping that current SWE leaders will look for the competencies that are needed for their current positions in others. So kind of really thinking about who might take over your position, once you move on to a different one. What are the competencies that you found are most important for your position, and how can you help develop those in others? So again, you get to kind of develop that mentoring piece in addition to helping find additional leaders and developing others through SWE. And that's it for the common myths to go through. again, as Penny mentioned, we do have some question and answers that were developed as part of the implementation plan. These myths were just kind of a couple of the common ones, but we got a lot more. We did take the time to document them in an appendix of the implementation plan so that they're in a spot that folks can find them and can go through them at their leisure. So again, those are in Appendix 2 of the final implementation plan. And these are just a list of a couple of other things that were included. I'm not going to go through them in detail, but again, they address a lot of the major areas that are covered in the implementation plan and questions related to the overarching changes that Penny went through earlier. And then finally, I'm just going to go through a couple of the next steps. I did mention that this information has been distributed to the region leadership summits that have been going on over the past 2-ish months. Following the governance summit, we did put together a slide deck for governors and senators to give at region leadership summit. So hopefully folks have been seeing that and have been getting some information that way. Also, again, all 100 of those governance summit attendees that are FY18 SWE leaders are encouraged to share their experiences. So again, if you know somebody that attended that summit, please feel free to talk to them, ask them what they thought about it. Ask them your questions, because we really have empowered those individuals to kind of go out and talk about the governance changes and make sure that others know about them as well. Also, the bylaws motions that were associated with the governance changes were distributed to the membership pretty recently on September 11th. And as we mentioned, the Senate will be voting on them at WE17. So there's 5 bylaws motions, and they're available on the Altogether blog. And we'll also make sure, if they aren't already, that they're linked on governance.swe.org. And then a big recent step that we're excited to announce is that the implementation plan was finalized on September 20th, so just a couple of days ago. And of course, a big shout out to our Governance Task Force Chair, Penny Wirsing, for making that happen and getting that document finalized. As Penny mentioned, it is 50 or so pages long, a lot of really specific actions. And for those who haven't had a chance to look at it yet, it really is divided up kind of by different groups within SWE. There's a Senate section, a region section, a headquarters section, and so on. And it goes through for each action, who's responsible for it, what the action is, what the timing is. So it really is very specific, and we've tried to be thoughtful about making sure that all of our bases are covered. So again, one more plug, encouraging you all to go through that. And then, of course, now the implementation plan is finalized, we'll make sure that all the specific actions in the plan are getting assigned to the individuals that have them. The Senate vote on the bylaws will occur at WE17. Assuming that does pass, then that will trigger the sunsetting of regions at the end of FY18, as well as the collegiates getting voting rights. And the other changes that Penny talked through earlier on the competencies and changes to terms. Also, looking forward to FY18, we'll be doing a number of different webinars and communications. I already mentioned the responsibilities matrix that will be, I think, pretty important and impactful to section leaders that will be coming out within a couple of months. We're also going to try and do targeted webinars or podcasts that really focus on the specific way that different member segments are impacted. So, for example, we're considering doing a webinar that's focused on collegiate members and helping them understand what having voting rights means and what will change for them and how it will change. We're also looking at potentially doing separate webinars for collegiate section leaders and professional section leaders to, again, talk through the specifics of how their section will be impacted, and, of course, as Penny went through, some of the things that won't change. And then, of course, by the end of FY18, we'll be looking at officially dissolving regions, and all of those regions do have a dissolution plan and a plan on what to do with their finances in place at this point. And that will be kind of the official structural transition, though, of course, as folks are hopefully hearing from all of these next steps, there will be a lot of infrastructure in place before then to communicate the changes and to help everyone understand how it's impacting them. And then, of course, we'll continue to do that into FY19. And I think that will be even more important then to communicate amongst ourselves to make sure that folks are getting their questions answered and that all of the actions that we've been putting in place are getting implemented well. And so we'll look to you all as members to continue to give us feedback on that as that process moves forward. And so I did just want to put in one more plug before we take questions for governance.swe.org, only because we have really tried to keep it up to date with all of the good and important information. I also have in the corner here, for anyone who isn't on the text alert system for governance, you can text SWE governance to 56512, and that will, of course, trigger your governance updates, and you'll get a confirmation text back that has indeed worked. And I did just want to highlight, you can see this slide hasn't been updated in the last couple days because they're still showing a draft implementation plan, but these two areas of the governance website in particular, the detailed timeline and milestone section and then the implementation plan section, have a lot of great information on all of the documents that have been put out the last couple of years, a lot of the videos and other webinars that have been given before this one, and then of course the implementation plan section has both the draft and then final implementation plan for your review. And then this is just a picture of our last, one of our last webinars from I think the springtime where Penny gave an FY17 governance update, and of course now in FY18 we're excited to continue giving you all updates, and we will continue to do so. And then while we take questions, I'm just going to keep this resources page up just to make sure that folks have the email address if you have questions after tonight, which is governance@swe.org, and of course the website governance.swe.org, and then the information on how to get governance text if you are interested in signing up. So we really encourage you to socialize the information you've heard tonight. Be actively engaged in this governance process, and we look forward to answering your questions. Thank you all so much for your time.
So Alexis, couple of questions. I think a few that I see here we've sort of answered as you've gone along, but I see one here that has a question about how that Senate transition to the 3-year terms will take place. So maybe you just want to reference the implementation document, because I think there's a great graphic there that shows how that'll work.
Yeah, there is. Great point. And that we actually do have an animation for how that works, but unfortunately it's not in these slides. Really thoughtful plan was put in place on how we're going to get from the current structure, which is a little more than 30 members, to the 21-person final state. I will just make a couple of highlights quickly and then again refer you to the graphic because it is a little tough to go through it when there is not a graphic available. So at the end of FY18, all of the regions will elect one senator for FY19. So again, typically a region would elect one professional and one collegiate senator. For this year, everyone's going to elect one senator that can be either professional or collegiate, and that senator will be the first ones to serve a 3-year term in the Senate. And then kind of going forward after that, we'll have implemented the nominating committee vetting process where senators are voted on by all members, and there will be 7 elected essentially every year after that. Not surprisingly, that's going to result in a couple years the Senate's a little bigger than it should be ideally, and then a couple years it will be a little smaller before it reaches its steady state. But again, we do have those 3 special senators that can be used particularly in years where the total count of senators is lower than that we would ideally want it to be to make sure that they're able to cover all of the strategic planning work for SWE. And I should note for folks maybe that aren't aware, the board of directors for SWE are also non-voting members of the Senate, so we can also kind of help out and chip in as needed for years where there are less senators than needed, if that's helpful to the Senate. So we have a lot of good options there.
Great. Also a question back around collegiate engagement and representation. Can you talk about maybe efforts to get collegiates more involved in the committees?
Sure.
Do you want me to take that one, Alexis, or do you want to take that?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead, Penny?
Yeah, I don't want you to continue doing all the legwork here. So there aren't any specific positions set aside for collegiates, either in the Senate or in the committees. And there was some information in the myth that that Alexis went over, but I can tell you that the nominating committee is definitely interested in getting a broad range of perspectives and a broad range of competencies. I think when people hear that we're using the competency model, they're assuming that we're looking for someone who is highly competent in all of the different areas, and that's not the case. The nominating committee is actually, they acknowledge that you need a range of competencies and a range of experiences. And so they're looking at that for the Senate, certainly, and the other positions. And in terms of the committees, you know, there are a number of recommendations in the implementation plan for improving the overall committee experience and certainly getting a cross-representation of our members involved in each of the committees is part of that. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that helps. Another question here that I actually saw some dialogue on over the weekend with senators, and it's come up here because I think it does fit into one of those myths questions around concern about having all uncontested elections. And so maybe talk about contested versus uncontested, and I don't think completely uncontested is currently in the plan.
Correct. The draft implementation plan had that listed as something that was suggested the nominating committee consider based on the feedback that we've gotten from the summit and prior to the summit. The final recommendation in the final implementation plan is that most of the positions should be contested to the extent that there are viable candidates to be slated for the various positions, but that the president-elect position, because of the company buy-in that needs to be required in many cases, and just, you know, the effort involved in running for president-elect, it's recommended that that particular position not be contested. And it also recommends that for those positions that are contested, that we have a backup plan, because when you have a contested election, you're going to have some very active, very capable, very involved SWE members that don't get elected. And then what do? You know, we want to make sure to keep them engaged. So one of the recommendations is let's figure out a backup plan so all of those really active, enthusiastic SWE members who aren't elected have a role in the coming year.
Yep, and a number of questions about keeping males engaged with regions going away, and how we'll make sure that, you know, they have a voice and they know what's happening within the society.
Sure. So I'll take a shot at that one. I was privileged to be able to help out with kind of our MAL breakout at the Governance Summit. So I'll chime in there. So the MALs, I guess, for folks that aren't familiar with the members at large structure, these are essentially folks that either have kind of chosen not to affiliate with a section or do not have a section that is close to them. And so this is a group of members that is very good at operating remotely, very high functioning at coordinating and communicating amongst themselves. And we hope all of that, and we want all of that to continue going forward. So this doesn't recommend any changes to the MAL structure related to governance, other than the fact that, again, obviously the MAL president will no longer be part of the region governance team with regions going away. So essentially that's going to transition the MAL membership from kind of a region, a very dispersed, if you will, region, to essentially the most dispersed and probably largest section in the U.S. And that's a little bit of a misnomer, because of course they aren't a section, but hopefully folks get the idea there. The MAL leadership is putting a plan in place for how they're going to maybe restructure their own positions in order to think about, again, the different concentrations and even competencies that are needed to be for their organization to continue to be high functioning, as opposed to kind of affiliating on or having representatives on a region by region basis like they do now. So this is a long way of saying that that group is putting a plan in place, and if you are a MAL on the call and have questions about that, I encourage you to reach out to the MAL leadership, or at least for this year to your region rep before the new the new structure is in place, because, again, they seem to be well ahead of the game in terms of adapting to this new structure and continuing to be the high-functioning organization they are. And we actually have incorporated into the implementation plan the request for them to do a webinar on best practices for remote coordination and collaboration, since they are kind of the gold standard for how to do that now.
Great, thanks. A question around standing committees, and what does that mean for committees that aren't the standing committees? This specific question was around PDG, and does that mean because it's not a standing committee, it's going away?
I can take that one. So the standing committees, there were 5 specific ones, and as I mentioned, they were let me find them here: audit, bylaws, ethics, finance, and nominating. And those are listed as standing because they were seen as really having the ability to change the direction of SWE, where things like outreach and the program development grants are certainly very important committees, but it wasn't identified as a need for checks and balances with the leaders of those committees. There was some concern that if the board got more power, or they could start swaying the direction. And so by having the chairs elect of those 5 standing committees elected by the membership, there was a feeling that would balance that out. The other committee chairs will continue being selected as they currently are, and that is through the annual call for participation, and they will be selected by the board, and all of that will continue as it currently does.
Great. One more question around, is there going to be guidance on the dissolution of region funds?
Sure. So I'll refer folks to kind of their individual region officers. So every region at this point has a dissolution of fund plan in place. I believe every region has had their council vote on what that plan will be and is currently implementing it. So I don't have a list of each of the different regions and the individual plans that they've made in front of us here, but so I would refer you to your region governor and region officers for more information about what your specific region is doing with their funds.
Great. I think we're down to...
Can I just
go
add
ahead.
that in addition to the dissolution of the region funds, there are some specific activities like filing the final taxes with the IRS and that sort of thing. And those are addressed in the implementation plan with some additional information coming out to the region treasurers on just, how to do that to make sure that those EINs are closed out properly once the region is dissolved.
Great, thanks. I think we're down to just the last couple of questions that we haven't addressed. One is around, will there be metrics for LCC in terms of accountability of coaches?
So I can take that. Actually, the implementation plan does outline that the competencies for coaches need to be clearly identified, and the current coaches be assessed against those performance standards. And if they need to gain additional skills, then they be given that opportunity, or if they need to find another opportunity within SWE, they're given that opportunity, because it is recognized that the requirements of coaches going forward are different than they've been in the past, and we really need them to be very, very focused on section vitality and really working actively, proactively with all of the sections that they're assigned to. So there definitely will be some accountability and an assessment to make sure that those coaches are meeting the new requirements.
Great, thanks. One of the last ones here is around volunteer burnout and how with the new governance structure we're going to try to prevent what we've experienced in the past.
I can take that, and Alexis, if you'd like to jump in, please do. We do address that in a couple of different ways. There are a number of committee recommendations outlined to really help make the committee experience more satisfactory to our members. And so, to the extent that we're really focusing on having clearly identified goals and activities for the committees, that we have the right size of committees, and that we give the committees the needed support and resources. Also looking at expanding the information that's shared on what committees do, so that people may not know what PDG does or what outreach does. And so doing a better job of explaining to our members what all of these different committees do, so that people can really plug themselves in where it's the best fit for them. I would also say that there is an item in here about member satisfaction, and really looking, we implement all of these changes, then we go back in a year or so and start asking people, okay, is it working? Is it doing what it was intended to do? And then continually making adjustments to get us where we need to be. I mean, Alexis and I have put many, many hours into this implementation plan, but we by no means expect that this is the end-all, be-all. We know that this is a constant improvement process, and I think we're all looking at the same thing, which is to make SWE a success. And so whatever it takes to do that is what we want to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the only thing that I would add to that, Penny, those are all really great points, is again this shift is part of this attempt to create more meaningful leadership opportunities for folks, again, really shifting some of these admin responsibilities away from volunteer leaders. And I know that is what, at least anecdotally from what I've heard, that is oftentimes what's causing The burnout is a lot of that admin duties that kind of pile up either section level, region level, society level, and just kind of become insurmountable. And unfortunately, with the outstanding, wonderful growth that we've had as an organization, that also increases the amount of admin that's required, of course, for all of these roles and all of this participation. So really focusing on having leaders being engaged, increasing the amount of professional development and competency development they can do in these positions, and decreasing the amount of administrative work, we're hoping will help a lot directly with leadership burnout.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, Alexis, as we transition some of these things, the admin tasks, kind of taking a look at those as well and saying, is some of the things we're doing, are they still relevant? Are they still needed? Rather than just kind of blindly transitioning them places.
Absolutely.
Okay, I think that that pretty much covers the questions that we received.
Wonderful. Well, I think we'd just like to thank everyone so much for their time tonight and their attention, and again for your interest in governance and your very thoughtful questions. So again, please continue to look at governance.swe.org for additional updates, and please go read that final implementation plan.
Yep, and just a reminder that we are recording the webinar, and we'll be posting a link to that as well, so for anybody who wasn't able to join tonight.
And if you have additional questions, you can email them to governance@swe.org, and those get answered, and they also may often end up in the updated Q&As, because if you have the question, chances are someone else does too.
Well, I think that concludes this evening's webinar. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.